Warpaint.
They'll take you.
Fuck you! I was right! Fuck you! I was right!
You need to remember that.
By sharing this video.
Oh no! Fuck. Yeah.
Welcome to Warpaint, sir.
It's 11:59 at Radio Free America, and this is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn.
Music and the truth until dawn.
Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. Occupied zone.
The chair is against the wall.
The chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall. John has a long mustache. John has a long mustache. It's 12 o'clock, Americans, another day closer to victory, tree. And for all of you out there on or behind the lines, this is your song.
Marty, put it away.
I will in 5, 4.
You can slap him.
What? Wait.
One.
You.
That's 3! Thanks, baby, you're the best! And as a special added bonus, I've composed a song just for this occasion. Ted, lights!
Oh.
What is this feeling that's put you in your place? A hot red burning on the side of your face. You feel the blood rush to your cheek. Tears start to fill your eyes. And your lips are trembling, but you can't speak. You're trying not to cry. You just got slapped across the face, my friend. You just got slapped. Yes, that really just happened. Everybody saw it, and everybody laughed and clapped. It was awesome. But you just got slapped. Happy Slapsgiving, everybody.
They told you the war was over, and that the culture battle was done, dusted, settled. They told you to go home, smile nice, and obey. But you're here. And so am I. Which means it's not over. Who wants to begin?
I'm tired of sleeping and dreaming about the shell of a being. I'm tired of working and bleeding. I am the God and I mean it.
There can be only one.
16, pouring up another scene. Papa got the vaccine, so ain't no acting, playing no practice. Niggas wanna check this album playlist. Fuck you, pay me. I'm tired of sleeping and dreaming about the shell of a being. I'm tired of working and bleeding. I am the God and I mean it.
You are now banned from the computer. Goodbye.
And the sunshine shines. Headed out west, sucker, because I wanna be a cowboy, baby. With a top left back and the sunshine shining. Cowboy, baby. West Coast chillin' with the blues wine. I wanna be a cowboy, baby. Riding at night 'cause I sleep all day. Cowboy, baby. I can smell a pig from a mile away.
Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Warpaint. I'll be your host for this episode. I'm Tim Talk6, and Kim started a tradition here a la Scott Adams, and I think I'm going to do my best not to disrespect that tradition. Grab any glass, any cup, any beverage of your liking. It could be coffee. Today for me it's water. Have a sip simultaneously. It's good, it's cathartic, it brings us together. We're doing the same thing, we're all here in the same place. We've got a really nice special episode for you today. We're going to go over the myth of the noble savage and talk about what Thanksgiving should really mean to us. Cheers. Well, in America especially, but all over the West, and especially in recent years, we've started to become inundated with this myth, this message of the noble savage. It's not unique necessarily to America, although the United States, our history, is used as a glowing example next to British imperialism of an example of why the West should be ashamed for itself and for existing. America is seen as, at least in the minds of far too many people in modernity, some of whom are inundated with this belief system through college and other forms of higher learning and academia. Others are just jumping onto a bandwagon as any excuse to rage at the West in general, specifically white Christian nations. In America, the colonists that first came here encountered hostile local tribes. It's a fact. This mythos goes back quite a ways. You can say that in year 1000 approximately, when Leif Erikson came to Canada, you can say that when the copper was mined out of North America and brought over back to Europe to form the Bronze and the Bronze Age, as 99.9% pure copper can be found here in abundance, more so than almost anywhere else on planet Earth. We just don't have tin. At least not as much and not as easily available. But we know that then in the 1400s, there's a lot of complaints about, obviously, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, arrived here between 1492 and 1493 with a whole handful of his ships and associates. Spain had just kind of exiled the Jews in general around the same time, and it started the golden age of Europe, the Renaissance and Re-Enlightenment era, coming out of the Dark Ages. But it's interesting that in the pursuit of gold and wealth, he arrived here in the New World and encountered local tribes, and the argument goes back and forth that he was essentially acting on the behalf of very powerful cabal of Jewish merchants. It's a theory. Now, you have 1776 being the real ending of that, because obviously Spain was here, in South America and North America, but the idea of the noble savage being a mythos, that extends far beyond the New World, extends far beyond the creation of America. The mythos exemplified here with, I'm going to bring up Hesiod, the Greek philosopher. He had epic poems about 600 BC. You can also see this concept again repeated. That'll come a little bit later, Kimmy. You can also see the same concept repeated in even the Old Testament. The idea that as civilized people, you look backwards and refer to a golden age in the past, that at one point humanity lived incongruous with nature. We were, pure of spirit and pure of mind. We didn't even need to clothe ourselves because we weren't ashamed of our nakedness. Everywhere you walked, you could just pick a fruit and eat it, and the lion would lay with the lamb and all. It's a mythos. It's not real. It's usually seen and developed because as society progresses, you encounter more and more problems, especially the bigger a society gets. Society itself can be seen as a positive thing or a negative thing. I mean, we all know the meme, we live in a society, but society and civilized behavior are supposed to go one in one, hand in hand. when you stop being civilized and when you allow ideologies that are antisocial to take root, it makes perfect sense that you would look to antiquity as an example of a better time to be alive. The modern world, Ted Kaczynski-esque thoughts on the Industrial Revolution and its consequences for the human race, all societies, there's some merit to them, but if we go back to the Hesiodic writings, the concept of the noble savage being an archaic myth, associating the perils of society with industrial improvement, comparing our past to the Garden of Eden, vis-a-vis the Old Testament, in which mankind moved in harmony, not knowing sin or evil. Each following age has brought on more conditions of suffering and oppression to humanity. If you want to jump forward in time, you find rather popularly referenced writings by Tacitus, the Roman historian. He wrote about savages that they encountered in Europe, but specifically in his text Germania. He compared the simplistic and honor-driven culture as superior to Rome's in many ways because of the trappings of a larger and more developed society. When you start getting too big for your britches and you start utilizing more currency, you start having class and mass class division. As empires are continually attempting to expand, territory becomes fought over. You become wrapped in decadence, usury, currency obsession, luxury seeking, the death of monogamy. He's quoted in saying, thus it is that they live the lives of well-protected chastity, uncorrupted by the temptations of public shows or the excitements of banquets. Now, his view is romanticizing a culture that was brutal, that had very high infant mortality, and saw a lot of civil strife near constantly. Pagan law allowed for bloodshed over very little provocation. That said, in Germania, the concepts he found so romantic, for starters, adultery was a serious crime, and social norms were considered more necessary to promote law and order than a strict set of written laws. Tacitus, you can put his picture up, Kimberly. It's the profile of the gentleman. I believe his book Germania is also there. Anyone interested in reading some old books should always read old books. You should read the words of men who dedicated their lives to perfecting theorem, to really thinking and trying to change the world around them, trying to make logical comments on it, because even now, hundreds of years later, we're sitting here and discussing his thoughts as they're relevant to the way society even now views differences between cultures. Now, we like to worship antiquity. It's not a new feat or feature of humanity. It's pretty common. Tacitus, was looking at Germania and saying, wow, like their executions are public, so are their lashings. Women who commit infidelity are never allowed to remarry. Conflicts over land and property are usually settled with violence or with a decree that was backed with violence. It's not so different than society now. The difference he was highlighting was what he saw as a purity, a lack of attachment to concepts that were foreign. I mean, you know how Rome collapsed. You know how a lot of medieval kingdoms collapsed through debt, through usurious loaning, through unnecessary brother wars, conflicts of territory over ego, slaves, a lot of trying to inundate your own country with people that hate it and force them into being citizens because you can somehow just beat the bear until it wants to stand on a ball and wear a tutu. It works and it doesn't. We can see the fruits of that endeavor now in living in a multicultural society along the West. I would not say that the West is having a heyday at the moment. I would not say this is the golden age. I would say things definitely need to shift, and I can agree. I absolutely agree. One of the aspects of antiquity he is viewing with such a positive light would be the past is associated with being untouched by modern life's corruptions. And it's why when Europeans began the age of exploration, we associated every low-tech culture we encountered with golden age mythos. We saw these people are living pure. These people are, they're not bothered by the petty squabbles that we have. And at the same time that, while those hobbits look so quaint and they live so simply, we transpose our historical myth regarding the subject onto the straw hut dwelling in the primitive. We throw the baby out with the bathwater, essentially. Religiously, the West was conquering the world and convinced that the end times were consistently around the corner. There's a romantic view given to the past, but it's vague. A vague, undefined golden age no one has a memory of outside of myth and legend. The realities of trying to live as a primal savage, infant mortalities through the roof. You haven't been able to clearly define your own territory and property from hostile wildlife, let alone neighboring savages. I'm going to get into the way that Native Americans lived, if you want to call them that. We know who they were. They were Mongolian immigrants who crossed the Bering Land Bridge, came here, settled down, and did not live peacefully with one another. And their practices, having no basis in the Magna Carta, were mostly based off might makes right. If I can take it from you, I will. And might makes right is not the romantic, chivalrous image of two men in shining armor battling over a woman's honor. Might makes right is a crackhead stabbing you in the neck in an alleyway and taking your watch because he was stronger than you and more capable at violence and more willing to be violent. People romanticize concepts they don't have any experience with, and it's a foolish decision to make, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion. Religiously, the West, during the time while it was conquering the world, was convinced that the apocalypse was very near. You had the flood prediction of 1524. Around the time, you can bring up the third slide now, that copy of the book on cannibals, or of cannibals. This is by Michel de Mont. I'm sorry, I'm not classically trained in French. I'm going to butcher the last name. Montaigne? Montaigne. All right. In the 1500s, when France started encountering cannibals, I believe these were, I don't want to say it incorrectly. I think they were like Brazilian, or I think it was Brazilian savages. When they were encountering cannibals, he was starting to talk about how there's a simplicity to the way that they live, and the decisions that they make, even if they're brutal to our perspective, they have a purity to them because they're not so convoluted with corruption, with deceit. It's a purer, simpler way of living, which, especially when you've got, like, around the time that he lived, the fear of the flood prediction. Italian and German astrologers are interpreting a rare superconjunction of all 7 planets in February of 1524 as a sign of a coming global flood, much like the story from the Bible. This prediction, it spread widely, and it caused significant fear across Europe and fueling the belief that the world was about to end. You had an Anabaptist movement, preachers like Hans Hut and Melchior Hoffman gaining followers by prophesizing the end of the world and the establishment of a new righteous order. Hunt in particular claimed that the last and most dangerous age was upon humanity. Nostradamus, also quite famous. Although his famous work was published later, Nostradamus began creating his philosophies in the 1550s in response to the era's anxiety. His Centuries, first published in 55, offered hundreds of quatrains, 4-line poems, detailing supposed future events. Religious and social upheaval was incredibly common. We're talking about the Protestant Reformation, widespread religious wars that followed, created an atmosphere of anxiety and a sense of impending doom that made people more receptive to apocalyptic predictions. You now add that to the chaos you're seeing with mass-packed ghettos and cities, feudalism between warring lords. Every time people get into war, and I mean, war is hell. You've heard that before. Wars in their wake leave rapes, destroyed buildings, burned out villages, demolished cities, babies left to freeze as their parents bleed out in the snow. War, especially civil strife, war between Europeans, when they started popping off at each other, forming new religious orders, bashing each other's faiths, churches, kings, the religious right to rule being called into question. You'd be shocked, but I'm sure most of these viewers would not, at the brutality humanity is capable of bestowing upon itself. The horrible, horrible, horrible things we are willing to do to one another if we can talk ourselves into being vindicated and righteous in doing so. You can kill of cannibals. Yeah, once you get, like, one could argue that the end times are still around the corner now, and it's an argument that we hear continually. More so, it's part of the Christian mythos that forms the basis for Western civilization. Turning to God can beat back the influence of the devil, and the more people that turn away from the church, the more likely the world is to fall into apocalyptic conditions. Kimberly, you can kill of cannibals off the screen. This same belief system predates Christianity, but it's still widespread across Europe. Now, before Christianity really had a foothold in Europe, you had the Germanic concepts of Ragnarok. You had the continental Muspelli and other related traditions, a myth, Muspilli, or the world fire. I'm self-educated, so if I mispronounce foreign words, I apologize. I'm doing the best I can. I didn't learn it in school with a proctor putting it on the chalkboard and telling me. So AI is really useful for things now because I can usually just ask it how to pronounce things. But for the most part, if I make a mistake, I make a mistake. I'm only human. The world fire mythos was predicted that the entire world would end in a giant battle. The sky and earth would burn in all-consuming fire started by a giant fire giant, a Surtur-like being. Surtur, S-U-R-T-R, it's common in Norse myths. The Celtics, the Irish and Welsh fragments, they had a myth of the Second Battle of Mag Tuired. It's a later version of their folklore. They said that either a great flood, return of the primordial waters, or the sky literally falling like the world tree collapsed. There'd be no fixed final form, just recurring cataclysms. Everything would start anew, essentially, completely unrooted. Greco-Romans had the Stoics. I was mentioning Hesiod earlier. The Hesiodic ekpyrosis, Ekpyrosis, the Stoic. The end of the Iron Age was a big thing. Hesiod was very obsessed with. He said the world had 4 stages, 4 big ages after we left the Golden Age at the egg of humanity. And again, a lot of these mentalities come from fear, discomfort, and a jaded disagreement with the modern world. There's merit to them the same way now people proselytize that we're gonna burn this planet to a crisp. We're gonna use up all of our resources. We're gonna brother war with each other. Someone's gonna hit a nuke button. Jesus is going to come back and instruct his followers to take up the sword to divide. It's gonna be, we even have theories and fears about this in modernity in regard to religious uprisings and upheavals. You have Judaism in Israel and the Samson option. If they get too panicked, they'll hit a button and nuke everybody. You've got the Islamic Caliphate prescription, their whole concept of world slavery, mass conversion at the tip of the sword, gelding and murdering the infidel. You've got satanic movements and cults, and huge aspects of the occult focus on globalism, but not all of them. All right, in Slavic folklore, it was the end of Svetovit's age, and Zemi devouring the sun, giant dragons and serpents, the Chernobog force, it swallows the sun, eternal darkness and cold, followed by cosmic floods again, and fiery renewal started by Perun's last thunderbolt. The Finno-Ugric, or the Finnish Karelian, had other myths of the same, saying that the world's pillar would collapse. As I'm sure you've seen in antiquity, a lot of people seem to believe in this as the symbol of the world, a giant tree, the roots forming an inversion of the top canopy, and it grows on until it eventually grows back to touch the earth, and at that point everything ends. There were a lot of people who believed lots of crazy shit, most of it leaning in the exact same direction. And this is before Christianity, the idea that the end of the world was coming, so we had to make real decisions now. We had to force the world in a direction now. And even then, they would look upon with quaint fervor and appreciation any hobbit-like structure, any sort of a civilization or society that had become untouched by what everyone depicted as, or foresaw as, the end of life as we know it. It's not uncommon. One could say that the European world, which we now know as the Christian West, had intense reverence of the past, and that the imprint has left a glowing admiration for those who live without our specific levels of social unrest, corruption, and complex social fabrics, laden with problems of sinful malice on behalf of manipulations within our power structure and cultural landscape. This veneration of the past is often wielded by those who have disdain for Western culture and the West in general. I touched on that earlier just a touch. More than a true understanding or affection for the savages and the uncivilized. The Disneyfication of history, both deliberate and through osmosis, it's a serious problem. We get beer goggles pretty severely, especially in the West. And you can't really blame people for feeling that way. It's why fantasy is so popular. It's why Game of Thrones is more popular than actually reading history. It's why Star Wars is so popular, because the original movies, anyway, they followed Joseph Campbell's A Hero's Journey. It's very good psychologically. People enjoy that sort of thing. But we, at the same time that we enjoy underdog struggles and we enjoy watching somebody become powerful and take charge of their life and beat back evil through force, we also like underdog stories because the Jew loves underdog stories and they run our Hollywood. I mean, you can also see that narrative is itself European. You can see it reflected in Australia, for example. Australians love a good underdog because they themselves were underdogs. They were a prison colony, and they were surrounded by every hostile creature you can imagine. Spiders and snakes and things in the water, things that sneak up on you in the dark, diseases and poisons so potent and unknown that to encounter them meant to condemn yourself or anyone that you encountered after being infected. I mean, the hostile aboriginals and cannibals, constant interference from foreign nations. And then you also had British imperialism forcing a boot on their throat. So you can understand where this mentality is not necessarily something that should always be spat upon, as we spit upon the diaspora Jews mentality of the underdog, because their stories, the stories that they're telling through these movies, they're ignorant to the facts. It's about emotional vindication. Oh, I feel bad for the Native Americans because they were just running around in the woods naked, just writing funny memes on trees and throwing tomahawks and, petting a bear, Pocahontas type shit. It's nonsense. The Golden Age utopia is a lark, and so is the dystopian anti-societal hatred growing in the hearts of the weak right now. Malcontents tend to be misanthropic. It's just true. A lot of malcontents tend to hate every aspect of the world around them and other people because they themselves are miserable, and they don't want to change and put in the work to undo the ideas that have become addictive. It's like depression. Depression's like a literal demon whispering in your ear. You'll know that you should get up. You'll know you should do something different. But instead, you'll continue to gravitate to the same mentalities that'll keep you stuck. They'll keep you essentially feeding this other thing your feelings, feeding this other thing your energy instead of working on yourself. If you're sitting in the dark, stepping into the light would probably seem like a painful thing to do. You don't want to move. An object in motion versus an object at rest. It wants to remain where it is. It wants to keep falling. It wants to stay still. I think you understand what I'm saying. Native Americans, especially the indigenous savages of North America, they were not peace-loving hippies. That entire mythos is crap, and I've got quite a bit of information to relay to you, so buckle up. The Comanche. Comanche meant enemy, by the way. The Comanche in the Southern Plains, they really enjoyed torture. And this is not unique to the Comanche tribes, but they invented something called running the gauntlet, followed by prolonged stake torture. Captives, usually male warriors from the Apache, the Ute, the Mexican or Texan groups, or anyone they could get their hands on as far as colonists, as far as anyone they thought might could make right by taking from, including taking their lives. They were stripped, tied spread eagle to stakes or wagon wheels, and slowly burned with firebrands, hot irons, or burning splints that were pushed underneath fingernails and into flesh. Women and children of the band participated, especially widows of men killed during the captive tribes' combat and conflict. Women and children also participated generally in torture because they thought that it was good for young boys to get used to the screams, as they were convinced that harming people and making them suffer more was spiritually and ritually cleanse not only you from doing it, but give pride to the gods and energies and spirits that were witnessing your act and witnessing your strength. The more you could make your enemy scream, the more you could humiliate and break them, the more powerful you were. The duration, it could last anywhere between 12 and 48 hours. The goal was to force the captive to scream. Failure was dishonor for him and honor for the torturers. Survivors were sometimes adopted into the tribes as slaves, but most of them died. Famous accounts of this, the captivity narratives of Rachel Plummer, written 1836, and Dot Bap, 1860s. You can look those up. 2. The Eastern Woodlands, the Gauntlet cultures, especially the Huron Indians, the Wyandot Indians, the Iroquois Confederacy, and some Algonquin bands. Ritual name was running the gauntlet and caressing with flames. The captives were forced to run between two lines of villagers who would beat them with clubs, thorn whips, and firebrands. Survivors were handed to bereaved families who slowly burned them at the stake, cutting off their fingers and digits and extremities, scalping them while alive, and pouring hot boiling sand onto the skull directly. There was a spiritual purpose to this. Like I said, these were godless, heathen savages. Savages. Their spiritual purpose, and the captive's courage and pain satisfied the grief of widows and orphans and transferred the dead warrior's spiritual power to the community who heard the screams. Okay? I don't want to hear about, I hate hearing about the noble savage mythology. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't. The Crow of the Northern Plains. That can be read about in the Jesuit relations texts in the 1630s to 50s describing the Huron and Iroquois' torture in excruciatingly painful detail. Not for a weak stomach. Crow tribe, the Absaroka of the Northern Plains. They were known for finger sacrifices and stake torture. Their captives, who were mostly the Lakota and the Shoshone, they were tied to stakes. Crow women would cut off one or more of the captive's fingers, sometimes eating them raw as offerings to the Morning Star or to avenge dead relatives. The Morning Star, that's interesting. Luciferians take the depiction of Satan to mean that he was the star of the morning, the brightest one, and the Morning Star. That's interesting. Crow women would cut off fingers as offerings. They would eat them. Prolonged burning and slow scalping followed usually. The Crow were unusual in that women often directed and carried out torture. Minor matriarchal society nod. A lot of women constantly want to assert that it's always men. If only women are in control. Yeah, okay. so they could do hysterical, insane shit like that because they're emotionally angry and they don't have reason the same way that a man does. So when a man wants you dead, he kills you. When Crow women wanted you dead, they'd spend 2 days just to make you scream, because they thought that made them powerful and appeased their gods. The ritualized burning along the Mojave. They burned prisoners taken in war, burning them alive. They usually did that to other tribes, the Yuma and the Maricopa. The Mojave tribes also had a tendency to genocide. They would kill all the men or castrate them, turn them into slaves, and then they would rape the women and turn them into slaves and raise the sons and daughters as members of their tribe. Wonderful. Captives were tied into piles of mesquite wood, slowly roasted alive, while singers performed war songs, often accompanying the screams as musical tones. The survivors of the initial burnings were sometimes kept as slaves, but most of them were just killed. Less mouths to feed. George Wharton James, this is as late as the 1900s, you can read some of his works about it, and earlier Spanish accounts describe this as a formal public spectacle. The Tonkawa in central Texas and the coastal flames were infamous among Texans for cannibalistic torture. Captives, usually Comanche or Lipan Apache, were tied to stakes and pieces of their flesh were sliced off and eaten in front of them. Ritual cannibalism helped them absorb their enemy's power. After hours and days of this, the victim would finally be killed and the rest of their body consumed. Texas Ranger accounts from the 40s to 60s, that's 1800s, and survivor narratives described the Tonkawa allies of the Rangers finishing off Comanche's prisoners this way. Even when we were trying to get them to just act like normal, regular people, their instincts would take over. And after a man was wounded, they would insist on stuffing holes inside their body and torturing them to make them scream. Because the screams make you powerful. The Asians have that philosophy about martial arts. You ever notice that? I think that the shouting gives them power. Specifically Chinese. Like, what is it? Ip Man. Can't remember what it's called. Specific brand of Kung Fu. Doesn't matter. In 1622, the Powhatan Uprising in Virginia. 347 English colonists were killed in coordinated attacks across the settlements. Many of the bodies later found were scalped and mutilated. That's Edward Waterhouse, A Declaration of the State of the Colony in 1622. You can read his accounts there. The Deerfield Massacre in Massachusetts, 1704. French allied, because you have to remember, the natives, if we want to keep calling them that, the savages, they sided against the colonists 3 times formally, not to mention all of the Thuggee tribe-esque little ghetto murders that would occur, the kind of shit we see now on buses and trains, setting people on fire randomly, stabbing women in the throat when they're not looking. Just, that kind of fun, civilized, normal behavior. In Deerfield Massacre in 1704, French allied Abenaki and Mohawk forces killed 56 people, captured 112. 30 to 40 of the dead were scalped on the spot. Survivors saw scalps carried off. That's the source for that is Reverend John Williams and The Redeemed Captive, 1707. I've read that. It's dark. The Fort William Henry Massacre in New York, 1757. After British surrender, Montcalm's Huron and Abenaki allies killed between 100 to 200 wounded or sick people, scalped almost everybody. French officers counted dozens of fresh scalps taken. They were specifically interested in the scalps of women and children. The source is French officer Louis Antoine de Bougainville. That's a Bougainville. He had a journal, and there were also British survivor accounts included in his journal when it was finally published. Ganadahunton Massacre, Aftermath. It was Ohio in the 1780s. Though the 96 Christian Delaware were killed by Pennsylvania militia, nearby Wyandotte and Shawnee later arrived and scalped many of the dead to use their scalps for bounties and honor bracelets. The source is Contemporary Moravian Missionary Records. They're available online in full PDFs. All right, the Barbers Creek Massacre in the Virginia frontier. That's 1763. The Shawnee War Party killed 11 people in one cabin. All of them were scalped, including the children, who were also cooked alive. That's from the Virginia Colonial Council Records, 1764. In Yellow Creek, West Virginia, in 1774, there was a revenge killing of 10 Mingo, including women and children, one who was pregnant, by settlers. It was in response to Shawnee and Mingo raids in the months preceding that had left dozens dead and some crucified across the Ohio Valley. It was the trigger for Lord Dunmore's War. I don't know how much attention you guys paid, but in school. or if your school even bothered teaching you this sort of thing. A lot of it I had to learn on my own. Public school education is absolute crap. American history should be taken a lot more seriously, in my opinion. All right. So, the source for that you can find from St. John Knight's Captivity Narrative in 1782. The Fort Mims Massacre in Alabama in 1813. As far along as 1813, we still have to deal with these problems. I mean, the Red Stick Creek Warriors killed 250 to 500 settlers and refugees inside the stockade. Almost every human body was scalped, some while still alive. The reason they don't know the full number is because people were carried off to be eaten, ritualistically. The source for that is U.S. Army officer reports and survivor George S. Gaines, writing about it in, again, 1813. That's Fort Mims Massacre, M-I-M-S. The Spirit Lake Massacre in Iowa in 57, banned by the Sioux again, the Santee Sioux, killed 40 settlers over several days. All adult victims were scalped. Some women's bodies were mutilated while they were still alive. They would feed them their own breasts. The source for that is Abby Gardner Sharp, The History of the Spirit Lake Massacre. She was a captive survivor. She wrote her book in 1894. It took her quite a few years to get over it enough to organize it. Okay. Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving as a tradition. The original, we talk about the Plymouth event in 1621. What actually happened, as far as we understand it, is that the Wampanoag Indians helped the Pilgrims survive from 1620 to 1621. Maciot and 90 other warriors joined the colonists for a 3-day harvest feast in autumn of 1621. Venison, wildfowl, corn, all sorts of things we would not want to eat now, but it was great then. They'd just come off the backs of starving all winter, essentially. They were used to European winters. They had no idea what America would be like. You also have to consider the hostile wildlife we have here, but the British had pretty successfully culled on their own. I mean, you're not allowed to hunt in Britain with a sharp arrowhead. You weren't for the longest time. It was considered poaching. Can't go after the king's deer, and the king would send out hunters. There would be mass organized hunts to go out and purge boar, and that eventually turned into some weird homosexual practices around fox hunting, but they're Europeans. What do you want? They joined for a 3-day feast in autumn. That's Edward Winslow from Mort's Relation, 1622. There was no violence, and it's not given the first Thanksgiving label the same way, but earlier Thanksgivings were also recorded in North America, often after violence had been settled between natives and settlers. 1619 English settlers at Berkeley 100 was the name of it. They declared an annual Thanksgiving feast 1 year before Plymouth. In Texas in 1598, Spanish expedition under Don Juan de Oñate held a Thanksgiving mass after crossing the Rio Grande. No native violence was recorded on that day, thankfully, but not long later, the same exact expedition encountered their first taste of native culture. Mass executions of children on a large stone obelisk. Wonderful. All right, in 1622, the Powhatan Uprising in Virginia, that's March 22nd. You can find a lot of evidence about this one. Less than a year after the 1621 Plymouth Feast, Powhatan warriors killed 347 settlers, a third of the colony, in coordinated dawn attack, scalped and mutilated most of their bodies. That's Edward Waterhouse from Declaration, 1622. Virginia ordered an official day of Thanksgiving after retaliatory campaigns in 1623. They made it a holiday, an official holiday, because they wanted to make the statement. Like, yeah, we all got together and ate, and it wasn't a problem. We were doing just fine. And then all of a sudden, you had to get uppity about it and start acting this way. And when you understand that their culture saw torturing people as a holy rite, you can understand why the idea of live and let live, even among them, was nonsense. And yeah, you're always going to be able to convert somebody to your way of thinking. I'm not saying there weren't natives who eventually got their shit together and didn't act that way. And some tribes were just victims of other tribes because they didn't have the urge to behave this way. But by and large, left to their own devices in this nation before the arrival of white European colonists, they were eating children, mutilating each other, mutilating women, selling quite a bit of slaves. They sold horses and slaves. They would use their slaves to grow crops in actual agricultural systems after mimicking the farms that were established by Europeans, but they would use the slaves to harness the crops. There are countless examples of absolute abhorrent racial hatred to every other group other than natives. The things they would do to black slaves were so horrendous that whites would declare outright war on whole tribes and say they're not allowed to come here and sell anything. after they'd walk people into town with missing noses, missing ears, burn the bottoms of their feet every day at night so that they wouldn't be able to get up and run away, skin their palms, lash loads to their backs like fucking animals, like pack mules, because they didn't want to be able to use their hands at all. If you interbred with a black, you'd be publicly beaten and shamed within the tribe and the tribal system. If you interbred with a white, you would be seen as having a higher social standing because A, they thought it would endear other whites to your children and make you seem less hostile, and B, because they just really didn't like black people. I mean, the Trail of Tears, the reason there were not a lot of photos taken, and if there were photos and drawings, photos taken or paintings done from historical context, they're not popular amongst leftists, because you know how many slaves, how many black slaves the Cherokee were bringing down along with them? They were slave traders. They loved that. That's what they were into. Go up in the middle of the night, grab a woman, beat and rape her, humiliate her, break her spirit, and then when she's all used up for you and your boys, sell her to somebody for a couple bucks. There's your native savage. There's your wonderful Pocahontas. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. So, the Pequot War Massacre in Mystic, Connecticut, May 26, 1637. English and Narragansett allies burned a Pequot village, killing 400 to 700 people. The Connecticut colony declared a Thanksgiving Day on June 15, 1937, to commemorate the victory. You've got to understand who the Pequot were, why they behaved the way they did, and why people hated them, and made a statewide holiday. A holiday in Connecticut was declared in celebration for the victory. I mean, rational, God-fearing people don't celebrate the utter destruction of an entire group for no purpose, without cause. If we cannot live amongst each other, then you must be strung up. It's been a very Western concept for a very long time. And I think when we stopped having public hangings, you can see a massive decline in the civility of the average citizen. I think even in England now, 50% of the population supports the death penalty generally. And if you keep adding specific parameters, that goes up to as much as 80%. Do you support the death penalty for murderers? Do you support the death penalty for child rapists? Do you support the death penalty for serial child abusers? The number of people that would say, yes, I'm okay with it, it goes through the roof. You should just hang them. Put the heads on pikes in Tudor England like they used to. I'm telling you, it's a pretty effective solution. It's also really good psychologically for society itself to view those who would harm the innocent and take glee in it, to view them as other. That's probably a pretty good thing. You can pray for them. You can try to turn them. You can try to offer them last rites, sure. And you should be merciful to a degree, and you should try your best to live biblically. But you also have to consider punishment, justice. It demands it. It demands it. You can be punished for what you've done here on earth and offered eternal reward in the afterlife if you repent properly. They're not mutually exclusive. These people don't understand that. Godless savages. Okay. King Philip's War in New England. Let's see. The Wampanoag, Narragansett, and Nipmuc warriors killed 600 English settlers and burned 12 towns to the ground. Notable attacks were used as Thanksgiving triggers, like the Great Swamp Flight in 1675. Colonial militiamen went back to war against the same tribes, killing 1,000 of them, especially every woman and child. They purged them back out. Same with Rhode Island and Massachusetts. After you can find most of the sources for that in Increase Mather, A Brief History of the War with the Indians with 2 R's. The War with the Indians. The Candlemas Massacre in York, Maine, January 1692. The Abenaki and French allied warriors killed 100 settlers, took 80 captive, scalped 2/3 of them. Massachusetts declared the day a day of fasting and humiliation, followed by a Thanksgiving when the survivors were ransomed. The response up there was pretty fun too. You should look into your Maine history when it comes to specifically the northernmost states that had to deal with natives who would do shit like this. Their responses were brutal. It'd be an on-site situation. The sources for a lot of that you can also be found in The Redeemed Captive. I think I mentioned that book earlier, 1707 by Reverend John Williams. Okay, the Erie tribe were exterminated by the Iroquois. By 1656, there was not one more member left. They had all either been taken captive, raped out, or killed. The neutral nation, that's what they called themselves. They were exterminated by the Iroquois as well in 1651, so a few years before the Erie. The Huron and Wyandot Confederacy was reduced from 25,000 to less than 1,000 people by the Iroquois again. The survivors were scattered, forcibly absorbed through slavery and war wives. You know what war wives are, right? Think about what a war wife is. The kind of culture that thinks war wives is a normal and acceptable practice. I've killed your husband, and I found you hiding in the house. So now I'm going to take you, and you're going to be my slave. I'm going to make a wife of you. Okay. Yeah, real nice, peaceful fucking hammock sitting, tobacco smoking, petting raccoons. No, it's Disney nonsense. You can't live alongside people like this. My great uncle, 6 times back, Daniel Boone, had to save his daughter from, I'm assuming it says savages. Sorry, I have an elastic band holding it back. Well, good on him. The Last of the Mohicans has written about it. Oh, that's very sweet. I've seen the film. It was years ago, but I have seen it. All right, so. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm trying. Thanksgiving is definitely a hot button issue for people because they look at this through a very strange lens, a lens I don't understand. If this same behavior was being performed by people now, or if I could list off a history of just white people acting this way towards Native Americans, completely unjustified, not retaliatory whatsoever, but just off onset, like, hey, that's nifty. You got like Japanese looking hair, and you're playing with a bow and arrow with stone arrowheads because your technology is so primitive. That's really cool. I'm gonna just shoot you for fun. If that's the entirety of the history, they would be completely justified. But their complaint is about the U.S. government. Who doesn't hate the U.S. government? What American citizen doesn't look at the government like, yo, you are a problem child. You're a liar. You're a cheat. You're a thief. You made deals with the government, and the government stabbed you in the back. Oh no, the government lied to you. I'm sorry, Pocahontas. The government lied to you. Why'd you think the government wasn't gonna lie to you? And why'd you turn around and the same people getting oppressed and pushed over and forced drafted into wars and taxed to death? The same people, you're going to blame them, not the government. And now you know for a fact that anytime they did try to organize and en masse and go attack the U.S. military, they got their shit pushed in. They got blown out. They lost. They weren't good at war. They were good at like raping women, kidnapping children, scalping dead bodies. They were good at genocide. Sneak in the middle of the night and slit everybody's throat and walk off with women whose breasts you'd cut off, whose feet you'd mutilate so they couldn't run away. And they'd have no choice but to just lay on their back in your tent until you raped them to death. Sorry to be graphic, but this is not a show for kids. You understand where I'm coming from. The idea that it was the colonists' fault, who were being pushed and fucked with by the same government, a government that the people went to war with themselves in the 1800s. It's called the War of Northern Aggression. The North, the Union, the big-time bureaucrats, those who get fat off other people's labor, the useless eaters, the true useless eaters. People say entitlements start with welfare down bottom. Entitlements go top down. You've got these people who have never really worked a day in their lives. They live on ancestrally, nepotistically handed down bundles of trying to think how to word this properly. What people refer to as white privilege, when they talk shit about white privilege, if they're not just saying because you're white, you're better, and you have privileges because you're white, if they're not just basically espousing white supremacist rhetoric, which a lot of black people seem to do without even realizing what they're doing, if they're actually making the argument that it's about ancestral wealth and inheritance and logic and reason, and they're talking about how you were given a worldview that allowed you to be more successful because of nepotistic connections given to you from your family that passed them down to you painstakingly. That argument, yeah, it makes sense, but you're not describing the average white person. More white people by number per capita, more white people are on welfare, food stamps, SNAP, and WIC than black people. And it's not just because of the population difference. It's because a lot of white people don't have ancestral wealth. They don't have anything to inherit. And what they do inherit is debt. And there's a system in place where the government is wedded to these evil ideologies and they shit on you. And you just have to take it. So the idea that like white privilege means that when the government lies to your tribe about how much territory you can have wherever they push you to, your response is, okay, because the government lied, I'm going to go find a little white girl and cut the top of her fucking head off and pour boiling sand and water onto her skull and then smile while she screams because it gives me power. Why did we give them casinos? Why did you reward that behavior? How? Okay. The Tobacco Nation, the Petun Indians in 1650 were exterminated and later absorbed through slavery and war wifing by the Iroquois. Yet again, the Iroquois and the Iroquois colonial allies completely destroyed the Susquehannock. By 1680, they were completely gone. The Lipan Apache, 1830s to 1850s, they were hunted to extinction by the Comanche. The last independent band was wiped out in 1858. The Tonkawa, by the 1860s, were reduced from thousands to less than 100 by the Comanche. Survivors placed under U.S. protection, they then started working with the U.S. military to get revenge, to go back and, yeah, that's pretty fucked up they did that, but like, you realize y'all all have to go, right? So would you like some revenge? Why don't you show us where they like to hunt, how they like to live? You know, why don't you tell us where the sacred lands are that they're going to want to protect? Because we just got to walk up and we got to whip out 50 cows and just start taking care of the shit. There's no live and let live with bugs. There's no live and let live with people that want you to be destroyed because of who you are intrinsically. And that's exactly how the savages felt about colonists. It's how they felt about each other. It's how they felt about everyone they encountered. And it's not just North American. Go South America and look at those tribals. Look at the Aztecs and the Mayans. I say. Okay. The Tonkawa, just covered them. The Kiowa and Apache, they were reduced to less than 300 by the Lakota, the Cheyenne, and the Comanche. They lost independent existence. Their tribe was eventually just completely absorbed or captured as slaves. Now, the Native American culture did allow for some slaves to become essentially members of the tribe, but then there was a social caste system, and they would be on the bottom. They were just creating ghettos. You'd have the shittier teepee. You would be last to be offered up at the buffet. You're not getting any organ meat. You're boiling a sheep's head. That's what you're doing. So several small Tasmanian and Hiltic clans in the 1700s to 1800s, that's Heiltsuk. I don't know how you pronounce that gobbledygook. The Tsimshian, Tsimshian. The Tiramisu and the Heineken clans, that's what I'm calling them. They were erased by the Haida and the Tlingit. Tlingit sounds like a fun slur. Tlingit. Tlingit. But yeah, specifically in slave raids, they were completely wiped out. They don't exist. They stopped existing before we had anything to do with it. Various minor northwestern Californian groups like the Yurok and the Hoopa, they had contract killings. Entire villages they paid entire villages to be destroyed. They were paid, and they happily just took the money and said, "Okay, you want us to move some of these natives, some of these hostile scalpers? Yeah, give me $2 a head. I'll kill every man, woman, and child there. No moral qualms about it. Give me the money. Can I torture him first? Please, Mr. White Man, can I do my thing?" Awful, awful, awful. Just disgusting. The general practice employed in these campaigns, the deliberate massacre of non-combatants, women, children, and elders to prevent future generations. It's genocide behavior. Burning of entire villages and food stores to starve out any survivors who hid from the conflict. Repeated follow-up raids over weeks, then months, then years, sometimes decades to hunt down any surviving refugees. They would wait and then look for smoke and come around at night. And they would send in scouting parties, and they'd find that, some mother and 2 kids, the kids are getting older now. We'll come back in like 5 years when her daughter is able to be bred. And it's dark history. It's really dark shit. The killing and absorbing the last breeding age survivors. I just covered that. Effectively breeding out the tribe. And then there was a caste system, and it would be several generations. It would still be the fact that you were the grandson of some other slave that would still carry on shame with you. And then that rage you would put in your heart would mean that you'd be so much more willing to go and do this sort of shit, because very much like the political elites in the occultic West abuse their kids so that they'll be better businessmen, abuse their children so that they'll be better globalists and world leaders. It's like a practice. It's a practice that's passed down generationally. MK Ultra got into parts of this. how you can damage the human mind just enough to completely remove and warp someone's mentality and their ideology. You can break a person, and you can break a person jagged. You can leave them jagged so they're sharp, and then every other person that they touch for the rest of their lives will likely end up bleeding one way or another from the interaction. These people were doing that long before it started happening politically in this country. It had been happening in Europe already. Marquis de Sade, you can go back and look at the history. The practice of engaging in self-destructive behavior because it allows your soul to manifest evil and it makes you more capable of stomaching that evil. It's dark. It's why you need God. You really do. If left to our own devices, we are savages. It's why we are all sinners. It's why we can't help it. And we can come up with justifications. We can go back to Garden of Eden. We can go back to Old Testament. We can go back to pre-Christianity. It's the same patterns of behavior throughout all of human history. There has never been a noble savage. There has never been, I'm just going to walk down and pluck a pear from the tree and eat it and pet a wild wolf and we'll be friends for the day. And no, if you had a shiny rock, someone was going to try to kill you for it. Going back forever. All right, almost done with this list. Taking few to no prisoners, especially of adult males, refusal to adopt or ransom them, that was a big thing, complete refusal to ransom slaves. Slavery in that sense existed long before whites were here. Or if I'm going to refuse to ransom you back, and I'm just going to make you work until you die, and I'm going to castrate you, and I'm not going to feed you very well, and I'm certainly not going to pay you for your work because I don't believe in currency, outside of the honorary scalp I can wear as an earring so that I look cool. That's slavery. It's slavery of a different sort. That's more like the Barbary slave trade, which, unironically, they were doing the exact same thing to white Europeans. And they were doing the exact same thing to Africans. In the Arab world, they still have African slaves today. More slaves now than were during the transatlantic slave trade. The last one was, in some cases, specifically with the Iroquois, the Comanche, and the Lakota, explicit war leader statements of intent to make the enemy nation cease to exist can be found recorded all over the place. And historically, another concept you might find interesting, you can't disconnect the savage mythos from being white at all. Like, I'm Germanic. I know this. I can look at the history of my people. We were savage as fuck. Tribal, aggressive, hostile. Christianity saved our souls as a people. The most popular pagan tradition is conversion. For a reason. You'll start to see the light in it, the logic. I mean, the use of terror was another big thing. Displaying bodies, scalps, and heads to drive remnants into exile or hiding. International campaigns of extermination, not just territorial wars. Several of the targeted peoples have no independent descendants today. None. Absolutely none. I say that, ladies and gentlemen, to say this. European arrival was not a one-sided invasion. It was a meeting of two civilizations, each of them fighting for survival. The pilgrims had survived through alliances, adaptation, refusal to die. They'd done it through faith in each other, faith in God. America was not born from guilt. It is born from endurance. It is born from endurance. We had hostile natives. We had hostile animals. We had other European countries that were getting involved in the mix. They wanted this territory. The Louisiana Purchase was... How much did France say they owned of this country? They just said they owned it. That's ours. Manifest destiny. Go west. Heading out west where they appreciate meat. Pilgrims survived through alliances, adaptation, and refusal to die. Thanksgiving marks a transition from struggling colonists to a new people, their own traditions. It's why we love guns. It's why we like frontier toughness. I mean, the American identity was formed through tenacity. Suspicion of monarchy, family-based communities, deep Christian tethers, high literacy, firearm familiarity, self-governance. Continental expansion was not theft. It was a long process of war and treaties and betrayals and settlements and trades and alliances. The need to survive. The need to survive. The refusal to be told no. And the fact that they argue Native Americans didn't understand the value of property rights. They understood slavery. They understood bodily autonomy and what property was. You can't sell something that isn't yours. They understood horse trading. They understood weapon trading. They understood shiny rocks are valuable. They had wampum. I mean, we introduced them to all sorts of trickery, I'll give you that. Whiskey, giving them guns to kill each other. None of that's great, but it had to be done. We had a valuable resource they couldn't make themselves. Why do you think they used stone tools until they started engaging with Europeans? Because they didn't have the smarts to make metal. Even in the Aztecs, the Incans, the Mayans, they used sticks and sharp rocks, obsidian blades, to carve out children's hearts, by the way. Rest in piss. Nations are not born through gentle suggestions, but through conflict and creation. The most historically important moments in building the American nation, at least some nice ones to hit on, is the Great Migration, 1620 to 40. Tens of thousands of English Puritans settled in New England. Defines America's early cultural DNA: literacy, religion, law, family structure, work ethic, Magna Carta. We had a lot of different European immigrants who wanted to come. The European Brotherhood, you could call it. Protestant cultural order. Nearly all the early settlers are varieties of Protestant Christians. Shaped morality, worldview, governance, and schooling. The reason Catholics got such heat when they started immigrating to this country was because the Naturalization Act of 1790 was very specific, and they saw adherence to the Catholic Church as loyalty to a foreign state. So it made a lot of American nationalists and American natives, not indigenous savages, American natives, American founders, AFNP, American founders, no parties. The American founders looked with immense suspicion at people who still held intense loyalty to foreign nations and refused to speak English. They didn't like it because they saw it as an invasion, and they'd already been invaded. They'd been dealing with the Spanish and the French. They'd been dealing with the Germans. They've been dealing with, I mean, like I said, Leif Erikson in about year 1000 came to Canada, had metal forges going there. The influence didn't disappear, and I'm sure there's lots we don't know, and I'm sure there's lots of books that were never written because, believe it or not, literacy was not incredibly important to everybody in 1000. Even in the 1400s, 1500s, literacy was an American concept when we said that we should have schools that teach everyone basic Latin. We should have schools that teach everyone the ability to read and write and speak whatever language they're going to be encountering on a regular basis. Instead, now we want Google to do the thinking for us. We want translator apps on our phones because, is it because we're not smart enough? Is it because we're too lazy? I think it's because we don't understand the importance of harnessing yourself into the most you can be. You need to be as much as you can be. And believe me, any individual person listening, you are capable of more than you give yourself credit for. You can absolutely embody the American spirit. I don't care what country you're in. You can embody 1776. You can say fuck the crown and mean it. You can carve out a place for yourself in this world. But in order to do so, you need the skills and the tools. And the only one that can give them to you are you. No matter how many push-ups somebody else does, you're not going to get any stronger. No matter how many hours somebody else works, you're not going to make any of that money. No matter how many languages Google can translate for you, it doesn't give your brain the ability to speak or harness or understand those languages. You got to put in the work. But anyway, it's a ladder. You just keep stepping up the ladder. You just keep trying. You really put a sincere effort in. You know what I mean? The frontier expansion from the 1600s to the 1800s, I mean, we had settlements push inland, frontier culture developed, self-reliance, armed households, community defense, complete independence from the monarchy and suspicion of the government. With any good Western, you'll see, how do people feel when the U.S. government starts rolling through? Immediate suspicion. Probably catch a few long stares, look like you're not from around here. The American Revolution happened not long after that. We saw a shift in mentalities, no taxation without representation, the idea that we weren't going to be a vassal state of Europe or England anymore, that if a king is going to see us essentially as serfs, we don't really see what benefit we're getting out of this relationship. The descendants of European settlers fought for rights as a distinct people, Christian moral philosophy, Enlightenment ideals. The founding political structure of this country was formed. The idea that we are who we are, and we're not going to be kowtowed or told to be someone else. And if you're not from here and you don't have a connection to this land, and you're instead barking orders from 1,000 miles away, what good are you to us? The Constitution and the Bill of Rights came after that, authored entirely by European descended thinkers, all of whom venerated Christ. The argument that any of the founding fathers, because they were involved in strange occultic practices, weren't Christian is silly. It's silly. Now, I can understand a lot of the Freemason history. I can understand the worshipping of Baal, why they put him on so many of their buildings, why it was left rather open-ended. Freedom of religion. That meant freedom of religion to choose your church, your Christian church. Benjamin Franklin was very specific about Jews. Thomas Jefferson was very specific about Muslims. I'm just saying, you gotta actually read the history. Don't listen to CNN about this shit. Anyone that's trying to tell you that America is an anything nation where Hindus can worship their blue demon god and drink cow piss and no one should look at them funny, it flies in the face of the previous argument that they've just been making in the last few years, which is freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom freedom from consequences, right? If I wanted to get a Charles Manson swastika tattooed on my forehead, I'd have to deal with the public consequences. I could do it, but I'd have to deal with the public consequences. And refusing to assimilate, getting a tattoo on your face is not an assimilating thing to do, especially a tattoo of a controversial symbol. Assimilate. It's a good idea. The legal DNA was rooted in British law and Protestant ethics when we formed our Constitution and Bill of Rights. Western expansion and Homestead Acts. Manifest your destiny. Push west. Millions of European families settled into the continent. They built towns, farms, states, political and physical nation building occurring simultaneously. The Civil War, the War of Northern Aggression, and Reconstruction occurred after that. A nation formed by one cultural core fights itself and rebuilds itself. It consolidates national identity rather than erasing it. I've said this before. Am I a huge fan of Europe? Am I a huge fan of England? No, I don't like a lot of the ways in which the European government chooses to behave. I don't like a lot of the policies that they adopt, but I don't sit here and not accept that I'm European. I'm American, absolutely. All my genes are European. My people are from Europe. We've made this place as a clone of and an improvement upon the European model. It was us, my ancestors, and yours. Well, consolidating national identity rather than erasing it. Why Thanksgiving still makes everyone very angry. It's a victory holiday, not a guilt holiday. A lot of official designated Thanksgiving celebrations were marked as something that will be annually repeated after we wholesale slaughtered a bunch of horrible savages, a bunch of despicable, monstrous people who had no business having access to our society or encountering us in the dark. They had no interest in working alongside us. They used justifications of rage against the government to, instead of assimilate, conduct themselves accordingly, grow, expand, self-educate, self-determine. Their self-determination led them to the belief that they should be murdering women and children in the middle of the night. And that's the great idea they landed on. You see what I'm saying? So, fuck them. You fucked around and you found out. It's a victory holiday. It honors our survival, our conquest, and our ability to build. It reminds Americans of who we used to be and who we still are. Strong, grateful, religious, defiant, united in purpose. Activists attack it because a nation that knows its roots is hard to dismantle, and Thanksgiving celebrates the cultural core of America, not their ideological rewrite of America. America was formed through frontier survival and cultural coherency. Acknowledging who built this nation is not hate, it's historical honesty and historical literacy. Thanksgiving is the embodiment of national memory. It is the story of a people who refused to die, refused to take orders they considered unlawful, and instead became Americans. This spirit is what they want erased. We won't erase it. We will carry it forward. Civilization is a torch, ladies and gentlemen. Civilization is a very bright torch, and everyone who participates in it as a civilized man, or woman, is capable of carrying that torch. And you could use it to start a new bonfire. Even the smallest ember of that spirit can be used to do amazing things, or terrible things. It's power. It's honesty. And this has been Warpaint. I hope you wore it well. I think we're still alive. Well, all right. This has been Warpaint. I do sincerely hope you wore it well. I hope you learned something and you got something out of this episode. You'll be seeing Kimmy's wonderful face again soon, I promise. She's just a little under the weather today. It happens. She's pregnant, weather change, she was cooking for like 5 days for Thanksgiving. But it's been fun. Thanks for hanging out, guys.
Oh. What is this feeling that's put you in your place? A hot red burning on the side of your face. You feel the blood rush to your cheek. Tears start to fill your eyes. And your lips are trembling, but you can't speak. You're trying, oh, you're trying not to cry. You just got slapped across the face, my friend. You just got slapped. Yes, that really just happened. Everybody saw it, and everybody laughed and clapped. It was awesome. But you just got slapped. Happy Slapsgiving, everybody.
Headed out west, sucker, because I wanna be a cowboy, baby. With a top left